Everybody wants to know the latest trail conditions, but not everybody wants to go on social media to get them. Some riders, especially younger ones, are missing your social posts entirely. Trailbot is the smarter way for trail managers to communicate updates without relying on social media. Don't let the algorithm bear your posts. Easily share conditions and closures to your website, social media, and the app all at once. Best of all, it's free. Trailbot is used by over 260 trail systems in 17 states and is growing fast. Over 50,000 riders have installed the free iOS and Android apps to get official updates with optional push notifications without having to see what their weird relative posted on social media. So spend less time babysitting Facebook and more time building, maintaining, or advocating for trails with Trailbot. Learn more at trailbot.com. That's trailbot.com. Trailbot, no algorithms, just trail conditions. Hey everybody, welcome to the Single Tracks Podcast. My name is Jeff, and today my guest is Jack Pittens. Jack is the co-founder at 9.8, an Ontario-based bicycle component brand known for its dropper posts and other innovative products. Thanks for joining me, Jack.
Glad to be on the show.
So tell us a little bit about 9.8. How did the company get started, and what's sort of your background?
So I have a background in mechanical design, worked for a lot of years in industrial automation, decided with my partner Steve at that time to branch out and do our own business, but to plan for success, we started by doing what we know, which was automation design.
What is automation design?
So we design manufacturing equipment for a variety of industries, from pharmaceutical, drugs, heavy industry, automotive. So, for example, ball top ice cream cones, the equipment that makes those are the stuff that we've designed.
Okay.
We've designed automation systems to do assembly of fuel tanks, and it's very widespread. So it's a exciting area to be working in if you like challenges. But when we started the business, though, we set a goal to say, well, we'd really like to have a business that we also own the intellectual property that we're designing. So in our regular business where we're doing contract engineering, we don't own the designs we create. So we started off by doing a project in the tire industry. We had a lot of experience building equipment for manufacturing tires, but that all happened at the time of the major issue in the U.S. with SUVs rolling over because of tires blowing out.
Oh, okay.
And that brought that whole industry to a standstill. And so we sold our portion of it to a company we partnered with and decided to go in a different direction. And that's where we decided to get into bicycle stuff, because we both were passionate about mountain bike riding, and we thought we could do something there. So kind of leading up to that, I had had a number of injuries with my neck due to over-the-bar instances and so on. And I decided, we really need a much better dropper post in the market. And this was at the time where there was practically nothing in the marketplace.
Yeah. What year was this?
We started working on our first dropper in 2013.
Okay.
And we launched it in 2014. At that time, RockShox had just dropped their first dropper post on the market. And everything else was pretty antiquated stuff, if you will.
Right, yeah.
So our first dropper post, which we called the Pulse, was not a big hit, other than there was, let's say, a niche group of people who really liked it, but most people didn't get it. So, for example, we had Pink Bike review it, and they didn't get it.
What was wrong with it? What did people not like about it?
Well, it had a feature that we called stepping. So it was a hydraulic dropper post, but if you push the lever to an initial detent, it would step down 6 millimeters. And you could ratchet through the entire travel like that. So, but it wasn't done mechanically; it was all done hydraulically. So it worked really well. I still have people I know who are still riding it to this day. So it's a 12-year-old product, or so, or 10-year-old, whatever that is. But it was a challenge for us. It was a learning curve. It was expensive to make. Margins were not good, but anyways, it was a learning curve. And like we said, the market at that time really just wanted a dropper that was either up or down. And this had a lot of complication in it to create a function that they didn't get. So we went back to the drawing board and we basically made a list of what would the ultimate dropper have in terms of requirements, capabilities, performance, and so on. And then from that list, had a lot of brainstorming sessions to figure out how do we achieve those goals. And based on those discussions, we came up with the current dropper post that we're still selling, which is based around what we call the drop lock brake. So instead of using hydraulics to position the post, we have an expanding brake that is spring energized. And when you operate the lever, it takes the spring pressure off the brake and allows the post to freely move up and down through its travel.
Okay.
So it gets rid of all of the hydraulics related issues. The post cannot become spongy. If your cable breaks or whatever, the post locks up in its current position. The amount of air pressure used to move it, so the mainspring getting it to return is just air pressure, but it's pretty low, typically 25 psi. So not your typical hundreds of psi preload pressure.
Yeah.
So stress on components and so on are different. So we launched that in 2016. I think we were voted by Pink Bike as one of the nominees for Best Innovative Product of the Year.
Pink Bike, never heard of.
Never heard of them, eh? Yeah. Anyways, yeah, okay. Anyway, so that was some nice recognition, and then we were the first company to take a post beyond 150 travel. So we released a 175 and 200 travel when everybody else was still at 150. It was funny, at that time we had licensed Raceface to license our technology and make their own version of our post. And, we let them know what we were doing, and they came back and says, there's nobody who's going to want a 200 dropper post. That's crazy.
Yeah.
And, it was, once we launched it, it was our biggest seller.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Cause it was the only one in the marketplace. These days we're up to 240 travel, I believe, is the longest that's out there. And I think it's pushing the envelope, but I'm sure there are riders out there, like we've had requests for more than 200.
Yeah. I ride a 240 on one of my bikes. I'm tall. So yeah. And there's people taller than me. So
yep. At the time, one of the biggest challenges was bicycle frames were not engineered considering the dropper post. So the amount of insertion into the frame, the height of the seat tube were all challenges to fitting a long dropper in there.
Right.
Now a smart consumer can pick a bike that has an uninterrupted seat post and a low seat tube length, such that they are not restricted by the geometry of the bike to get the amount of travel you want into it.
Right.
For example, just for fun, we were at Sea Otter just recently, and we had a demo program going, and we threw a 200 millimeter dropper into a dirt jump bike.
Oh, wow.
So it was a crazy amount of travel on a small bike, but it fitted, and we were trying to get bikes that would accommodate the largest range of people. Even if they didn't want to ride a dirt jump bike, it was our small bike. So anyways.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, that background is really helpful. We want to talk about dropper posts, and obviously 9.8 is an innovator in this, with longer travel and with the design. I mean, listening to you talk too, it's like we take for granted now that dropper posts, for the most part, they're all infinitely adjustable, but in the beginning, they weren't, right? I mean, it sounds like some of your earliest one was stepped, and some of them were completely up or down. You couldn't have it halfway up or down.
Yeah, the good old pin in a hole, So
Right.
basically, and the optional model had a third hole in it, so you could drop it an inch or whatever it was to that intermediate position. But otherwise, yeah, when they originally came out, people were still trying to figure out what did they want out of a dropper post.
Right.
But we kind of figured that two position is somewhat limiting. It might be acceptable for some, but there's going to be others who want more out of it. And I think those experience in riding a dropper post and using it to its maximum and not just thinking about it, well, I just need to drop it when I'm going to do something sketchy downhill, but otherwise leave it up. I tend to look at the dropper posts from the opposite perspective of when do I need it raised? Otherwise, I have it lowered to some degree always. It's either an inch down or all the way down or somewhere in between, but I only raise it up when I'm doing a climb that's not overly technical.
Yeah, or just smooth ground. I mean, if you're pedaling, say you're on like a road for a minute or something, and you just want to pedal hard.
Yeah. And we've also, and this is one of the features I liked about our Pulse with the stepper feature in it, was we'd actually set the post up higher than our ergonomic height position. It was set up so that if you were climbing on the nose of the saddle, that was your optimum position. But then I knew that 2 clicks down was my ergonomic height, and 4 or 5 clicks down was my kind of flow position, if you will, and all the way down was, pointing downhill sort of thing.
Right.
So, I think there's still opportunity to pursue that, but I think the marketplace has got so used to the ubiquitous, infinitely adjustable dropper post, and they set it where they want it, and that works for 99% of the people. So.
Right. Yeah. Well, you mentioned drop lock, which is the system that 9.8 uses. It's different from the other ones. I mean, most other posts that people are going to be looking at, they're either like a sealed cartridge based situation, hydraulic. Is that right? Hydraulic, is that what you call it? It's air though, right?
Well, they use air or nitrogen as the spring.
Okay.
They use hydraulic fluid in a sealed cylinder with a piston and a rod in it to do the positioning. And then there's a hydraulic valve that allows oil flow to go from the top to the bottom side of the piston, usually external. But it's, in essence, if you want to equate it to it, it's your office chair mechanism for going up and down.
Right. That's what I always thought. It's like an office chair.
Yeah, and it works well. Hydraulic fluid, when there is no air in it, is pretty stiff. The problem is that system requires either a double rod, one out both ends, which doesn't exist in a dropper post for obvious reasons, or it requires a floating piston to allow air pressure to absorb the differences in volume as the cylinder strokes, because as the piston rod comes out of the cylinder as you're extending it, the volume of the oil in that system is changing, and that needs to be compensated for. And that leads to the fundamental challenge with that arrangement, is that you have pressure keeping it pressurized, but if you put any load into the system that's trying to extend it externally, it will quickly overcome that preload pressure, and then the system goes into vacuum.
Oh, okay.
And then when the system goes into vacuum, that's where one of two things can happen. Either air is pulled through the seals into it, and then it gets spongy from that. But also, oil can have a component of moisture in it. And when you take oil and expose it to vacuum, the moisture content in there can vaporize. And now you've created air when prior to that, there was no air in the system. It was solid. But now, even though you didn't leak air into it, it now has air in it, and then you get the ubiquitous spongy post,
right,
which does exactly what you don't want it to do. You put weight on it, and it drops, and you take your weight off, and it comes up, and it's in your way,
Right.
So that was one of the top items on our checklist of why we developed drop lock is so that we inherently didn't have that problem. Is that
Yeah.
basically the locking mechanism works equally in both directions, so you can pull up on the post with hundreds of pounds. Like our quality control inspection is that they have a capacity of 800 pounds before leaving the factory. So
Whoa.
so
800 pounds pressing
yep,
down on
yep,
it?
or
Okay.
lifting up. We don't test it lifting up, but it works equally in both directions. But
Yeah. Well, that's a common question people have is like, can I put my bike in the stand, and hold it by the post, or can I hang the bike with a dropper post on it? What are your thoughts on that?
I do it all the time.
Okay.
So I don't think it's a problem. I would recommend, again, that's I'm speaking for our products. It's not a problem for our products. You would want to use some kind of a soft jaw, nothing that's going to damage the stanchion.
Right.
For our product, I only extended enough to get the jaws around it. But if I was doing it on anybody else's product, I would want to fully extend it so that I'm not putting any load trying to extend the post, and therefore,
Yeah, like it has a stop, like at the top, kind of where it's going to be, if it's fully extended.
yeah, extended. You can't then put it into a vacuum situation and create an internal problem for the dropper.
Okay.
But and whether it is like the older versions of posts, still some exist or whatever, that the body of the post is hydraulic, or whether it's now the much more common cartridge, they all still work on the same principles. It's just with the cartridge system, it's generally not serviceable. It's generally higher pressures because you're now putting a cylinder inside of your body as opposed to using your body as the cylinder. So that's driving up all of the pressures and forces higher. But obviously it's designed to do it. It works, but it's it's just upping those forces even more.
Right.
But yeah, now some brands may discourage clamping a post by the stanchion. I can't speak for other brands, but in my mind, to get the stanchion strong enough to handle the stresses, not just the one-time stresses, but also fatigue stresses from continuous use of the dropper, to meet the ISO requirements, assuming that every brand out there is trying to meet those ISO requirements for bicycle components. Basically, that tube is going to be strong enough to handle the forces to hold a bike up.
Right. You just might be introducing, it sounds like, some air into the system. And we should mention too, I think, so some brands have tried to mitigate this, or like, I think the Bike Yoke has a way where you can release that air, sort of.
Yeah, so they have two versions of the post. Their original one had a manual bleeding system that if you would get air introduced into the hydraulic circuit and it became spongy, you could bleed it. And then they have a second model that came out a number of years later that does this automatically as you cycle the post. Now, I believe those tend to be sensitive to orientation. So if you put your bike upside down, you're probably going to need to bleed it, but it's that functionality is in there. So, but yeah, that's, to me, that is a far better solution than having to send your post in to get it serviced or having to rebuild it yourself. Again, it was not our goal to inherently have a system that was maintenance intensive. And that's why we came out, like I said, with our drop lock design, was to avoid that whole issue altogether. But it's they definitely have, Bike Yoke definitely has one of the better products in the marketplace that's hydraulic based.
Right. Okay. Well, so one of the claims I think that 9.8 has made at some point is having one of the lightest or the lightest dropper posts available. And it's interesting because dropper posts are actually the example people love to give in mountain biking about, like, weight doesn't matter anymore. Like, we have dropper posts and the bikes perform better. And so we don't really care about weight, but some people do still care about weight. And if you got a choice between a lightweight dropper and a heavy dropper, I think a lot of us would choose the lightweight one. So I'm curious, how do you make a dropper post lightweight? Like what is all the weight that's involved in the system, and like where can you kind of optimize that?
Okay, I'll start off again with our product. We had done a bunch of testing on our test rigs to understand fatigue resistance and so on, as well as finite element analysis and so on it, and understood where there's material in the post that isn't necessary to meet the strength requirements. So, for example, the lower tube, because we have keyways in the lower tube to keep the saddle from spinning around, those grooves create a reduced wall thickness behind those grooves. Everywhere else, except where those grooves are, the wall thickness is thicker, and it's not necessary. It doesn't. So we have a bushing that rides on that surface, so we need to keep enough area for that bushing to ride on, but otherwise there's a lot of extra material in there. So one of the key features on our lightweight dropper is there is additional broaching operations to remove extra material out of that tube, so it's a thinner wall. Now, we limit the strokes on our lightweight to 150 because that's sort of the limit that we can go to and still have a comfortable factor of safety on strength and endurance for fatigue.
And I guess you also have to worry about the clamp force. I mean, in the old days, maybe it's not a problem anymore, but like if you tighten down your seat collar too much, it's going to start to pinch the post, right?
Yeah, there was definitely posts in the market that were very sensitive to that. And I think a lot of that came about because I don't think it gets talked about that much anymore. But in the early days of dropper posts, one of the parking lot tests was grabbing the saddle and seeing how much does it twist freely, how much does it move
Right.
side to side, front to back freely. And that's all clearances in the bushings and in the keyway system. So if you used lower tolerances to conveniently use available bushings, keep costs down and so on, if you use simple keys and so on, those all created a fairly sloppy post. It worked, but you could tell when you're riding it how much it's moving around underneath of you. It's not like it's going to fail or anything, but it doesn't feel like a quality piece, if you will. You know, so manufacturers trying to make it feel better tightened up these tolerances, and in some instances tightened them up to the point where the bushing on the bottom of the stanchion tube as it's running in the lower tube, if that goes through a zone where it's clamped by the collar to the seat tube, could create an interference fit where the bushing won't go past. So if you over tightened it, the bushing won't go past. If you under tighten it, then the post doesn't want to stay in position, or it rotates if you knock the nose of the saddle or whatever.
Yeah.
So again, those are things that we've tried to manage in our designs to mitigate those issues. So we haven't gone crazy trying to minimize this, what we call the stance between the two bushings in the raised position. Obviously, we can get a shorter overall post as we shorten that distance, but then the cantilever starts to get really long. So you've got a bushing stance that's maybe only 60 millimeters, and then you've got 200 millimeters projected up to your saddle from there. That's a very big ratio to try and manage.
Right.
So we've tried to keep that measurement somewhat reasonable and haven't gone crazy with it, but then implemented other things. Again, we've been very selective on how we've managed our bushings and our fits to keep that fit so we don't run into those problems. We've, on our longer posts, I believe we're the only company in the marketplace that actually uses 3 bushings. So we have 2 bushings in the lower tube and 1 at the bottom of the stanchion tube. So from the fully lowered position as it's coming up, it's supported mid-span and by the 2 end bushings, as opposed to just relying on that those 2 end bushings. You would I think most consumers would be shocked to see how much a post actually deflects under load.
Oh, yeah. Huh.
So, we've got a test rig that we designed and built ourselves to do all our testing on the post, whether it's ultimate load testing or endurance testing and whatever. And to see a post like a 200 post in there being loaded per ISO standards and seeing how much deflection there is at the saddle, again, I think most consumers would be shocked to see it move as much as it does.
Scary, huh? It looks like it's just kind of wobbling out there.
Well, it literally moves like 40 millimeters over. Like, it's a lot. Now, you wouldn't recognize that when you're riding it if you hit it with that much force. So we're talking about applying like 270 pounds force on the saddle at a prescribed angle, and it's a lot of force on that amount of extension, and that's done with the post at its minimum insertion depth. So, for example, one of the things we've done on our longest travel posts is we have not gone as long as we can on insertion depth, if you will. We've restricted the insertion depth so that we can save a little bit of weight here and there, and so that we're not managing as much cantilever, because we're figuring there's going to be very few people who are going to take a 200 millimeter dropper post and only insert it 100 millimeters into the seat tube.
Right, you got to be very tall for that.
Yes, that would be outrageously tall in our mind. It's, I think, for 99% of the people using a long dropper post, it's trying to get it as close to slammed as they can, where the bushing and seal assembly on the top of the upper tube is up to your seat collar or as close as you can.
Yeah. Well, so, thinking about that, minimizing the deflection and, considering more travel and or less insertion, how does the seat post diameter play into that? Like, if you go with a bigger diameter, does that let you get away with more? I assume the larger diameter is going to be stiffer. Is that right?
It is going to be stiffer. Stiffer is not really the challenge. Like I said, the post does deflect a lot, and you need to think about it like if you ever watched a documentary on testing the wings of an aircraft, and you'd be shocked at how much they can move. Well, just being in
I've seen it. Yeah, I've seen it on a plane, and it's kind of scary the first time you see it.
And when you see it in a plane and it's moving and it looks like the ends are moving up and down a few feet, that's nothing compared to the tests that they need to do, where the top of the wings, like on a 777, they're lifted by about 20 or 30 feet or something like that. It is mind-boggling. And so the whole structure is designed to be flexible. If you designed it to be stiff, it would be impossible to manage the loads and make it so a plane could fly. Same for this. It'd be impossible to design it so that it is as rigid as a solid bar. And still have all the functionality we need. So we're limited by the sizes that have evolved in the industry.
Yeah, I mean, I remember a few years ago interviewing someone. I don't remember which brand, but at the time they were saying, to go 200 millimeters of travel, they really felt like that needed to be a 34 millimeter seat post, or 31 at least. Yeah.
Well,
I mean, is that, but now today there's plenty of 30.9s that are 200, 240. So has something changed, or is that risky if you're going that much travel with that like lower diameter?
Well, I won't name brands, but I know who the company was who was promoting that, and I think that was the difference between a dropper post, that the body of the post is the hydraulic cylinder versus having an internal cartridge in it.
Okay, so it depends on the design.
Yes. So I think with let's call them older school designs that don't have a cartridge in it, I think it becomes limiting to have excessive amount of travel and still maintain the functionality, the sealing internally, and so on. It's now I haven't tried to engineer a version of a post like that. So that is speculation on my part. But I know for our design, it doesn't become a challenge because the way it's arranged, it can tolerate all of that deflection. The only area where we potentially see challenges is why we added the third bushing in there, is because with the upper tube deflecting and the lower tube deflecting and their deflections not completely matching, you can get internal contact, and internal contact in itself isn't a problem unless there's motion at the same time. And it takes some pretty special circumstances to get a significant load causing it to bend while it's moving, but it happens.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
to address those problems, we've, like I said, added that third bushing in there to eliminate that contact point, so that in the longer travel posts there, we can keep separation between those parts. And it's surprising, given how much the whole post deflects, it's surprising how small a gap can be managed. Like the gap between our stanchion tube and the ID of our lower tube is only 0.4 millimeters on diameter or 0.2 millimeters on radius, but that does eventually come into contact.
Yeah, interesting. Well, yeah, I mean, speaking of those tight tolerances, and it sounds like there's a lot of specialized parts that go into a dropper post in terms of the bushings and all of that. I'm curious to know about sort of your production. From what I understand, 9.8 dropper posts are assembled in-house in Canada. So
Yep.
Why go that route versus outsourcing to Asia, like I imagine most posts are?
Absolutely. Including when Raceface, for example, licensed our design, it was all outsourced.
Canadian company too.
Canadian,
Who would have thought they'd keep it? Yeah.
Canadian company, and it's like a lot of companies that are rooted in the early days of the industry, the mountain bike industry. It all started in house, and as things get more competitive, it drives outsourcing, and then a huge part of the outsourcing is driven by the OEs who, like, we do not provide OE to any brand because we don't make our dropper posts in Asia.
Oh, like it's just not cost effective for them.
They don't want to ship a dropper from Canada to Asia to assemble the bike and then ship it back to Canada.
Oh, I see.
So if it is not domestically available, preferably in Taiwan, they're not interested.
Yeah.
And I get it from they're on a tight budget to spec out a bike and put it on the marketplace for the consumer. It seems like a big price, but the cost of everything that goes into it and the margins that are left are not spectacular,
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because it's like, I'm sure very few mountain bikers and our listeners, they don't believe it. I mean, they think, yeah, bike companies are just making money hand over fist. But yeah, I think it's more, it's more like what you're saying, that the margins are tight for everyone. And yeah, it's tough.
Yeah. It started off as a niche sport. It built, but it built with an interest in technology. And, if you would compare what we could mass market a fork that was developed 15 years ago for now, it could be made pretty cheap. But if you want a top spec fork, for example, there is a lot of technology that's in there, and there's a lot of complicated manufacturing, expensive materials, it's just not free. It's not or you can't build it cheap and get the performance you want. The old adage, light, inexpensive, strong, pick two,
Right.
That still applies. You're not gonna get all three at a budget price. Something's going to get compromised, unless there's something revolutionary in the industry, and then we get a reset and we move forward. But the performance of a mountain bike these days is spectacular in terms of what it's capable of doing and the precision of all the components and so on. But it comes at a price, and the consumers vote by where they spend their monies, and the manufacturers are going to build the product based on how people spending habits are. So, you
Yeah.
know, in the forums, they complain about the costs of it, but then when they go out and buy a bike, what do they buy?
Yeah, they get it. They get the best one they can. And it's an interesting thought experiment too, to say, yeah, I mean, what if we paused right now? Bikes are great now. Let's not make them any better. Let's just make them cheaper. And, it's not going to happen, but that's one route
We
that you could
we
take.
could, but we probably had that same thought experiment 5 years ago, and then we looked and we
Yeah.
thought, we're at the peak of the technology
Yeah,
now.
this is as good as it gets.
And you look 5 years down the road, and yeah, everything's still advanced. And some things it's significant, other things it's small improvements, other things are frustrating standards changes. But
Yeah.
anyways, it is what it is. But yeah, it's. We can build our posts. Getting back to your earlier question, we can build them in all the desired sizes. It doesn't really present a challenge to us, other than smaller than 30.9.
Yeah.
We engineer our, we'll call it the 30.9, 31.6. They're engineered to be everything interchangeable other than the OD of the lower tube, and the
Hmm.
31.6 just ends up being stronger than it necessarily needs to be, but the differences are small. But going down to 27.2, we've engineered and prototyped posts and whatever, and it's just like, yeah, we're not comfortable putting something like that on the marketplace, because it is just everything's too dainty.
Yeah.
you know
Those are so hard to find. But it's interesting because a lot of people want one or are interested in one for a gravel bike. It's almost like the gravel bikes need to just put
yeah.
a bigger tube on there.
Well, and I think I'm not into the gravel sport per se myself, but I believe from people that I've talked to that a lot of the gravel bikes are gravitating in that direction, because they recognize that consumers are starting to adopt droppers in that
Hmm.
space.
Yeah.
And there has been requests for 27.2 for 10 years, and we are where we're at. And
Yeah.
it's
Nobody wants to make them. I mean, it's not just you. There's very few choices.
well, and I'm sure the ones that are out there, maybe they're making some sales, but
They're also limited travel. I mean,
very limited travel. And
most of them 100 is the most you're going to get. And for me, as a tall rider, even on a gravel bike, I think I would want more than just 100 millimeters.
yep. So, I just don't think they'd be very reliable in the long run. I've known people
Mm.
who've run them before, because the bikes came with 27.2, and I understand the logic before droppers became prevalent of putting in a smaller seat post size to make it more flexible
Hmm.
if you got a hardtail, to take some of that edge off. That makes sense too, but it's just,
Right.
you know when the market is shifting to droppers, it doesn't work. And some
Mm.
brands jumped on board early, and others took a while to get in the game. You know,
Mm.
and
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think the same is going to happen on other disciplines of bikes that are adopting droppers, because I don't think it's viable to do a significantly smaller, and something in between might be viable, but what's the point? We don't need another standard.
Right. I mean, that's the other thing I was going to ask you. Is I've always wondered, and I don't know if you know the answer, but I mean, why is there 30.9 and 31.6? I mean, they're not even a millimeter apart. That seems strange to me. What's the history, if you know it?
So this is all speculation on my part, but I believe this is all rooted in the manufacturing of conventional bicycles. So back in the day, bikes were made out of straight aluminum or steel tubes.
Hmm.
We all had derailleurs on our front chain rings. I'm glad they're gone. But anyways, tubes were designed around a nominal outside diameter, either 1.25, 1 3/8, or 1.5.
Okay.
Our derailleurs were designed to clamp on that. And if the manufacturer wanted to play with the strength or stiffness of their frame, considering their material choice, whether it's aluminum, chromoly steel or titanium or whatever, the only thing they could play with was the wall thickness, and they couldn't change the outside diameter, so they could only change the inside diameter. So,
Okay.
if I'm making a tie frame that I want a little more flexible, I'm going to use a little thinner wall. If I'm using aluminum, that, I'm going to probably end up with a little bit thicker wall. So, aluminum frames were predominantly 30.9, and chromoly and ties were usually a little bit more the larger size. 27.2 was the 1.25. With some other variations. Like I did have a bike that was 27.0 and whatever, but luckily those went away. But anyways, it's
Yeah. I think I have a mountain bike that's like 25 or something.
Yeah. And anyways, I believe that is where it is likely rooted. So it's just evolved over time where, people looked at what, if I'm trying to customize the frame to suit what I'm trying to achieve, how am I going to do it? And I can't change the OD of the tube, so I'm going to change the ID of the tube.
Right. Okay. That makes sense. I like that theory.
But anyways, I haven't gone and talked to like Gary Fisher or whatever and tried to figure out where this all came from. But anyways, it's that's my theory, and I think we're just living with it. I just thank God that it's not the flavor of the week every year. The sizes are changing.
Well, it's weird. It does seem to be pretty split. I mean, if I look at the bikes that I test or the ones in my garage, it's like about half of them are 30.9 and half are 31, but maybe it does come down to the material. I'll have to look at that. If it's like the carbon bikes are trending more toward one side versus the metal bikes, maybe that's where the split happens.
Yeah, carbon's a whole different kettle of fish, but I don't think there's a whole lot of carbon bikes out there that are dealing with conventional tube size related issues.
Right.
But, and then like you mentioned earlier, we had a player bring in the 34.9 size, that seems to be picking up momentum slowly. Where it's going to end up, I'm not sure, but...
Yeah, it is slow, right? At the time, it sounded like this is it. This is what everybody's going to do, but it hasn't worked out that way. It's not Boost or anything like that.
Yeah, like I did talk to some bicycle brands and asked them about it, and they gave me the backstory, but they said, yeah, from here forward, we're going back to our traditional size, whether it was 30.9 or 31.6, because the 34.9 was a red herring that wasn't necessary.
Interesting.
So, and then
good to know.
And then I think Specialized tried to push it a bit when they brought out their Woo post that required that extra diameter to get the mechanics into it. But that product didn't last very long.
Yeah, it doesn't look good. Yeah. Well, so talking about, you mentioned bike technology, how it's evolving constantly, and that's what riders expect. I mean, for dropper posts, it seems like the new thing currently is electronics in dropper posts, making them wireless. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, are there enough advantages where it makes sense, or maybe it only makes sense for certain riders or certain types of riders? Yeah, what are your thoughts on electronic dropper posts?
Just to start off with, I'm very much an early adopter. I love trying new things. Like I got a pinion-equipped gearbox bike as soon as it became available and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I am not a big fan of wireless droppers. I think there's a huge potential there, but I think the products we have in the marketplace right now, where the wireless connection is solely replacing a cable, the pros and cons doesn't add up for me, for the extra weight, the complexity, the cost. What did I gain out of it? And then again, thinking about our dropper post, because it uses a brake mechanism, it's like, think about your disc brakes on your bike. You don't use them as an on-off switch. You modulate it. And how I ride our dropper post is I modulate what the post is doing by the pressure on the lever. And I can't replicate that with a wireless connection. Not easily.
Yeah.
And if I'm going to go to the extent of trying to get a tactile feel at the lever and not have it as a on-off button,
Mm-hmm.
then I really need to think to the future as to where is this going to go, and let's skip the middle ground and make the leap to where it's going to go.
Hmm.
You
Okay.
know, to me, I really don't see the benefit. I think there's good things on components that are electrified, like I'm running a wireless rear derailleur.
Yeah. Yeah. I was going to ask, does it make sense there more so than a dropper post?
It's arguable that I think it makes more sense. Whether it makes enough sense, I think, is again up to the purchaser. But I got it because I wanted to try it and whatever. I generally like it, and I'm not sure I would necessarily go back, though I do really like my pinion setup as well. But I can see a benefit of some things that you can do with a shifting system as opposed to operating a dropper, where
Hmm.
with a dropper, all we're doing is opening and closing a hydraulic valve through a wireless connection.
Mm-hmm.
I don't, I don't get the benefit of that myself.
Seems like, I mean, a lot of it is just a clean cockpit, but, we've also seen a lot of rider pushback against solutions for that, right? That involve complicated routing and things. And
Oh yeah,
it's like, if that's all we're getting, then yeah, maybe
yeah,
that's not for everybody.
yeah. My latest bike has got through the headset cable routing, and oh man, I can't wait to see that go away. I just don't get it. And I look at the bike and I go, this is all done to clean up the cable routing. And in the end, I still got all the cables exposed. They're now pointing up out of the headset instead of out front. I think it's uglier. I think the fact that the brake hose now has a high spot that's higher than the lever
Oh, yeah.
isn't great either. And it's unavoidable.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then like one of our products is a system to adjust your headset angle through the head, or your steer tube angle
Right.
through the headset,
Mm-hmm.
and to experiment with that on a bike that I've got to break the brake line to get the headset out becomes a pain in the ass. I don't understand what we gained other than your bicycle shop can now charge more to do service work because it takes a lot more
Right.
effort. No knock against
Yeah.
them. It's, those expensive bills are being driven by the bicycle companies who are engineering this into the bike. It's not,
Mm.
it's a lot more work to do,
Right.
and you need more parts, to do something as simple as change out your headset bearings
Yeah.
is not what it used to be. And if it was done like it was on a road bike where the cables are all tucked into the bars and stuff like that, and you don't see anything anymore, okay, I get it.
Yeah.
And aero is a big thing for road and whatever. I get it. It makes sense. It's worth the compromise. On a mountain bike,
Mm-hmm.
I don't get it.
Right.
But anyways, it's the industry does what they think is going to be the next big thing, and
Right.
they're going to try it. I'm kind of hoping it's going to do like dual control from Shimano years ago,
Mm-hmm.
that goes away quickly. But we'll see what happens.
Yeah, but it never goes away entirely. Somebody's still got it on their bike, and they're going to bring it into a shop, and somebody's going to have to deal with it.
Oh yeah, and there's probably people out there who love their dual control, but they're riding on 10-year-old technology or older or whatever, and hard to get
Right.
stuff, but they like it, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. So one of the other things I wanted to ask you about that's not dropper post specific, but it's seat post adjacent, is the seat post head designs. Personally, I get frustrated with almost all of them because they all work a little bit different, and it can be hard to get all the pieces to fit together. A lot of them are like a 3D puzzle. So I'm interested in your thoughts and understanding the 9.8 head that you've designed. Like, how do you make a better seat post head, and why are they so complicated?
Well, particularly for dropper posts, I get why they've become very complicated, is because people want to get the maximum length of stroke in a dropper to fit in their bike. So
Okay.
the more vertically compact that head is between the top of the stanchion tube and the rails,
Mm-hmm.
the more stroke I can get into my bike.
Like how much? I mean, are we talking like 5 millimeters or more? depending on your design?
If I would say between some legacy designs and the state of the art current designs, it's more than 25 millimeters
Oh, wow.
difference.
Wow. That's a whole inch, right?
Yes, yes. So, if
Wow.
we typically think of a dropper post as being generally available in 25 millimeter increments, it's a
Hmm.
whole size up possibility
Wow.
for
Okay.
a
So
rider.
maybe that frustration is worth it.
Well, if it's something that you're dealing with frequently, it's a pain in the ass. But if it's
Hmm.
something that you only need to deal with very occasionally, but it allows you to get an extra 25 millimeters of stroke out of your post,
Hmm.
then I can't knock the design because it's a clever solution to improving the performance of the product for people who are looking to maximize their stroke.
Mm-hmm.
On our head, we very much do like our head, but it is not state of the art for the stack height. It's probably about 10 or 12 millimeters taller than what otherwise might be possible,
Hmm.
but it does completely separate out the fore and aft tilt from the fore and aft length adjustment, and it allows you to take the saddle off without touching your fore aft tilt, and so on.
Hmm.
It kind of happened in a funny way in that our original pulse hydraulic dropper post had a protrusion that came up through the saddle head, if you will, and we needed that hole in the middle through the clamp. So it inevitably ended up with this independent arrangement, and we've kind of loved it ever since. And we've tried to reconsider how can we do this, maintaining that functionality, because most of our customers really appreciate that head design, but get the stack height down. So a
Hmm.
work in progress, but.
Yeah.
But yeah, I get it. When you get your traditional seat post saddle clamp that I believe kind of started with Thompson way back when. It's a nice design, but it's like you said, it's putting a jigsaw puzzle together.
Yeah. I always feel like I need a third hand or something too. And, you want to loosen the bolts enough where it doesn't all come apart and you can slide the saddle in and out. But yeah, but not so much that it all just falls apart.
And then you got some other designs like the outgoing ASX model has those clamps on the side with the turning barrel. Personally, I hate those because they never, for me, stay in position. I
Hmm.
always end up smacking the saddle at some point, and you hear that dreaded creak that it slipped,
Right.
and it's like, oh, bloody hell. Um, so I'm not a big fan of that, and I guess they had enough feedback that they've redesigned that. Again, getting their stack height down. But
Hmm.
again, circling back to the wireless, most of the wirelesses up until recently have been a big sacrifice on stack height to
Yeah.
accommodate the wireless. So, on a bike with a cable operated dropper, you could maybe get a 200 in there, and with the wireless, you might only be able to get 175 or maybe even less in there. So again, that was
Oh,
that
interesting.
that was a sacrifice. So they've tried to address that now with moving the battery to the top of the lower tube and going to a more traditional clamp for the saddle. They're funky, and there's been some odd designs here and there, but that's kind of proven to be a very robust solution that can be made fairly light. It's micro adjustable, it's precision, it's just a jigsaw puzzle to put together,
Yeah. Yeah.
which is frustrating.
Right, for sure. Well, so yeah, I want to talk about another product that's completely unrelated, but that's a 9.8 product. Your company recently introduced a product called inverse pedals that basically flip the idea of flat pedals and put the rubber on the pedal and the spikes on the shoe, right? Tell us a little bit about that design. How did that come about? Like, why do that?
So we're in Canada. We get a real winter. We get snow on the ground,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes lots of it. We go
Mm-hmm.
through freeze-thaw cycles in the winter, turning
Mm-hmm.
trails to ice. You get sun on them and whatever. And riding in the winter, I love riding in the winter, but the pedal and shoe options have traditionally really sucked, in my opinion.
Okay. Yeah.
SPDs, anybody who's ridden in snow conditions in the winter knows all about them icing up, and that's
Mm-hmm.
extremely frustrating.
Yeah. And they get colder too, in my experience.
Yes,
Like if
well,
you have a cleat on a shoe,
yeah.
it's a lot
So
colder.
you got a heat sink.
Yeah.
You've got a connection from just below your footbed through a bunch of metal to the pedal that's all
Mm-hmm.
exposed. Your body heat is heating that up to make the icing problem even worse,
Mm.
and it's making your foot colder. And you get to buy expensive footwear to boot. So, but that was kind of state of the art. And then you got your flat pedals, which were designed for spring, summer, fall use, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And they work well in that application. But the winter boots you'd ride with that are not designed to work with those pedals.
Okay.
Any flat pedal shoe has got a relatively solid sole on it. There'll be some
Mm-hmm.
grooving,
Right.
minimal.
It's not lugged
It's not
like
lugged
a hiking boot.
like a
Yeah.
hiking boot or whatever. So you got a lugged boot that has 50% or more void ratio in the lug, and that's primarily what's hitting your spikes on your shoes, on your pedals.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't slip off, but you're not connected. You have miles afloat.
Mm.
So it's not great. Or if you would actually have a winter boot that would have a tread like a summer flat pedal shoe, it would be terrible on any hike-a-bike situation.
Right. Right.
So, my goal is to come up with a better winter platform. So I wanted the performance of a winter or a summer flat pedal shoe in winter. So I basically got a variety of pedals, started machining them, found a company that sold 510 rubber replacement pads.
Oh, like the actual 510, like the stealth dotty rubber?
You bet.
Or
And it's actually
oh,
the
wow.
company that sells it is actually the engineering group that worked for 510 at the initiation of the company.
Oh, wow.
And they're still in existence. They still have a brand, but it is not associated with 510 in any way.
Yeah. They're not like an exclusive supplier to 510.
No, they don't supply Adidas anything anymore, if you will.
Ah, I see.
But
It's the original.
it is the original, going back, more than a decade. They are primarily in the climbing shoe business, but they exist.
Mm-hmm.
But anyways, they happen to sell sheets of rubber, varies in size, but about a meter by a meter, in either dotted pattern or various smooth patterns and whatever. So I bought
Mm-hmm.
every material that they had, machined plastic bodies in all sorts of shapes, and from convex to concave and flat, and
Mm-hmm.
put different kinds of rubbers on there, and tried pedals with holes through them versus solid and whatever, and
Yeah.
just did a ton of riding in different conditions to figure out what was the best package of that, and that led to the development of the inverse pedal. And once we sort of got that under our belt and we were happy with how it's working, then we had two things to do. We had to figure out how to get it made, which was a massive challenge. That took 3 years to get that,
Oh,
to
wow.
get from a functional prototype to actually product in our hands that we could sell, and that was a nightmare. That's a story for another day. But while we're going through that exercise, it's like, I think I can ride these in the summer, and let's see what they feel like riding them in the summer compared to flat pedals and clipless and so forth. And so I would do things like tests where I would run one, a conventional flat pedal on one side and the our inverse pedal on the other.
Mm-hmm.
I quickly learned that, like many people know, you have a dominant leg. So I learned that I cannot do that side-to-side comparison without reversing it and repeating,
Yeah,
because
yeah, that makes sense.
my dominant leg may give me a different impression than my non-dominant leg. But anyways,
Hmm.
so I went through that, tried various pedals and shoes and whatever, and felt, really, after we got dialed in what are the best studs to use, we thought that this was a viable system in terms of performance. So
Hmm.
is there a market for it? And well, that was the $1 million question, if you will, is there a
Hmm.
market for this outside of winter use? So like winter riders, when they see it, they get it.
Right.
For summer riders, there's lots of people who think it's a joke. Fair enough, I was completely expecting that, but I think there is a lot of people who also get it. Like when we were at Sea Otter, it was a constant stream of people wanting to show us their scars. You,
Right. Yeah. Especially when you first, I mean, I've gone through that probably a year or two ago where I went from clipless to flat pedals. And I mean, for the first 3 to 6 months, yeah, about every ride, I would scrape my shins on the pedals. So yeah, that's a real problem.
yeah, so I think there is an opportunity here that right from the beginning. So if you're getting kids into mountain biking, you get your choice between the SPD learning curve, the risks of flat pedals, or using these pedal systems. What pedals do you want your kid on?
Hmm.
If you can have all of the performance but without any of the safety risks, why wouldn't you go for that if it's cost competitive, if you will?
Right. Hmm.
I think in general women really get it because they're more concerned about it than guys tend to be. I think guys who have done it enough and are don't care about fashion or what their bros say or whatever.
Yeah.
They just want something that works for them. I think it's awesome. How many people out there are riding with shin guards on just because of the pedals, but otherwise
Right.
wouldn't be riding with them and would rather not be riding with them.
Hmm.
So I think that opportunity is there. We're just right now trying to push to get it into the marketplace and get people aware of it.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, and you've got a couple different options for the shoe part because that's the challenge. Like
Yep.
nobody, as far as I know, nobody makes a shoe with the studs already in it. So you can either do the clipless pedal conversion where you have like a little plate with spikes. They can go to like a 2-bolt shoe,
Yep.
and then you can also put studs into your favorite shoe. And people might not know that people do this with tires. I mean, again, yeah, everybody in Canada probably knows this, or anybody who lives somewhere where it snows a lot. But
Yeah.
yeah, there's a tool and you can put these studs into a tire.
Yep.
I imagine it's really similar putting studs into a shoe. Is one of those solutions better than the other? And also, yeah, have you heard from people that are like, I don't want to do either of those. I'd rather just buy a shoe that already has spikes in it.
So there are actually some winter boots that come with studs already in them. They're not very
Okay.
popular and they're not going to be what we would consider to be premium studs like carbide tipped and whatever. But they tend to be more European than North American, but there are
Okay.
shoes or boots that you can buy that have studs.
Yeah. I had Trek shoes. I wonder if Trek shoes would work, like for running
Yeah.
that have the spikes, the metal spikes in them.
They might. I have not tried them. So much is going to come down to what is the geometry of the spikes? How big are the tips of the spikes? Are they in an appropriate spot on the shoe? Is there enough of them? So forth. So, and again, what is the magic answer for all of that? Well, I think that's going to be a learning curve, if you will. Like we've had reviewers who started off using the pedals without any studs and said, the grip really isn't that bad. And then they put 3 whole studs in the shoes and tried it and go, wow, that's more grip than I need,
Yeah. Oh,
and
wow.
that's where they ended,
Huh. Yeah.
whereas I normally think of putting in 20 studs in the shoe.
Whoa. Okay.
But I'm a little bit heftier guy than maybe the average or whatever. And, so what is the magic number for a person and where do they put them on their shoe? You can kind of tune that engagement probably more so than you can on a traditional flat pedal where you're limited to where the manufacturer has put stud locations.
Right.
This you can concentrate them centrally. You can put them around the perimeter more or less. We sell studs in different protrusion heights, so how far they stick out of the sole. We generally recommend the longer ones are better for winter use and the shorter ones are better or sufficient for summer use.
Okay.
But you could run the longer ones in the summer. You would just need to confirm that your shoe can handle the greater penetration of the screw into the sole. It's still not very much. Like the screw is not your traditional wood screw. It looks more like an auger bit for like digging a post hole or something like that. It's a very aggressive shallow angle bit that grips very tenaciously into the rubber. Not the easiest to install, but once you get the hang of it, it's really not that big a deal, particularly if you've got a shoe where you're not super particular about exactly where it is. Like if it wants to wander a couple of millimeters to one side or the other and you don't care, they're pretty easy to put in, and you can put them in with a drill.
Oh, okay.
If you're trying to hit the bullseye, then doing it by hand becomes pretty necessary. But again, it's not a big job. Like you can do a pair of shoes in under half an hour, and you're done. The studs are very robust. I've been running the same set of studs for 3 years now. I do a ton of hike-a-bike and stuff like that, primarily because I'm part of a trail organization that manages almost 50 kilometers of trail.
Oh, wow.
And it's very rocky. So I ride into the section I'm going to work on, lock my bike up, and I go and hike the trails while I'm working on it with the shoes that I'm using. And, they stand up to that abuse, no problem. Grip is generally not a problem. I can't vouch for every possible type of rock, but for example, I was just in Sedona, and though it's beyond my pay grade to ride, I was on the new Hardline Trail that you probably have seen the video of Remy crashing on.
Yeah.
I hiked that with the studded shoes on.
Oh, cool.
And I did not feel like I was putting my life at risk by walking on those shoes. Now, maybe polished granite is hard enough that it becomes a problem, but I would tend to think that most of the features that are that high commitment are going to have riders that are already experienced on the pedal system that they're on and aren't necessarily our key customers. I think the people who are on the learning curve, it would be fine. The only downside is, and if you've come from an SPD background, you don't use your shoes other than for riding.
Yeah.
For this pedals, again, it would be the same. You're not going to use these shoes for driving in your car or walking in your house or going to the coffee shop or whatever.
Maybe for shoveling snow.
Oh, yeah.
You could use it for that.
Absolutely. But so for the people who are used to traditional flat pedal shoes, it might be a compromise that they're not willing to make. That's fine. We're not expecting to revolutionize the industry, but we think there is a very strong market potential for it. It's just getting the word out there. Like one of our sponsored racers runs a youth program out in Utah, and their organization is just loving the whole thing. So we've got a number of pedals out with them for evaluation and go from there.
Oh, cool. Well, yeah, really cool product, and it's cool to see, trying new things and different concepts that people haven't tried before, because that's how we move forward. And obviously 9.8 is known for a lot of innovative products, including the dropper posts, but also I think you mentioned the angle adjust headset that you offer. But yeah, I'm curious, what else are you working on? Is there more stuff on the horizon, or are you staying pretty busy with the stuff you got?
So the Inverse is our latest product that we just launched. Prior to that, we expanded our Slacker line, which is the angle set adjustment.
Mm-hmm.
Current project is a new dropper post.
Okay.
We were actually hoping to show a prototype at Sea Otter, but we just didn't have it to a point that I wanted to show it yet.
Mm-hmm.
But it's at the point where we're going to start riding it. It is, I would consider it revolutionary as opposed to an evolution.
Wow.
I can't go into a lot of details about what it is. I have no idea whether the market is really going to want this product or not.
Mm-hmm.
It is going to push the price envelope. That's the downside.
Okay.
But it is what it is.
Yeah.
So, we're a company that we don't spend our money on marketing. We're not a company like Red Bull that the vast majority of their money goes into marketing. We put our money into engineering the products, testing the products, and the quality of the products that we're delivering and supporting them, and try to minimize our expenditures on other stuff that really doesn't add value to the product, but is a necessary thing to get the word out there.
Right.
So we've been more successful with launching products where we are unique in the marketplace. So when we launched our first, I'll say our current dropper post, the fall line, when we launched that, there was very few good droppers in the marketplace, so it grabbed a lot of attention.
Mm-hmm.
So that worked very well for us. When we launched our first Slacker kit, that worked with IS headsets, so we are, to the best of my knowledge, still the only company that makes a system that can allow you to adjust the headset angle on a bike with an IS headset. Again, that became very popular. We're hoping to do the same with this Inverse. Again, it's the first product like it in the marketplace. There has been other rubber-coated pedals, but they've never been, in my opinion, intended to be a performance option. They've been commuter pedals and stuff like that. The rubber has never been a vulcanized rubber. It's always been like a urethane or something like that, and it's never intended to use with spikes on shoes, sort of thing, to give you the performance that you're used to with a slow rebound rubber. So we're much more apt to taking a chance on a product that we believe in, that we think there's a place for it, that the product should sell itself, if you will, more so than trying to release a product that takes marketing to convince people to buy it. And like the new dropper post that we're working on, again, it would be something that doesn't exist in the marketplace now. Whether the consumers would want it is the big question mark. But based on how the technology in the mountain biking market has evolved, from very simplistic days to sophisticated suspension, dropper posts, e-bikes now, electronic controls for things that isn't necessary, but they're obviously selling. I think there is a market for this. Otherwise, we wouldn't be pursuing it, if you will. But anyways, time will tell, So right now it's in the development stages. When we think it's appropriate to show off, we wish to do that and gauge reaction, see where it goes. And, at some point we'll need to make the big decision of, do we actually take it into production, or was it an engineering exercise? And though a lot of effort goes into engineering a new product, the big dollars really come in when you got to commit to making a batch of product, in the thousands or whatever, and and then get them distributed and whatever. That's when the dollars really start kicking over, and that's where you got to be able to be successful with it, or it's a problem.
Right. Well, yeah, we'll be excited to see what you come up with when that's out, and like you said, whether people adopt it or not, we'll definitely enjoy talking about it, and arguing over
Yeah.
whether it's necessary or not. And yeah, that's part of the fun.
Yeah, like the pedal system, it's surprised us how many people we've bumped into know about it.
Yeah.
Like when I was in Sedona, I popped into a few bicycle shops just to show off the product since I was there. And it's like, oh yeah, we saw the articles, but it's so cool to see it in person now and whatever,
Yeah.
It's, the word's gotten around, we still need to work on it to get the consumer to be aware of it as much as we can. But, I'm excited about this dropper post, but, it's going to be interesting.
Yeah. It's marketing through engineering. I think you invented a new category there.
Yeah, well, I think there are people who would hopefully respect that, where they're, what you're paying for when you buy a product is, the value is in the product, not in the marketing that got you to buy the product. Sort of thing. So I hope people can appreciate that in what we're doing.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, Jack, thanks so much for taking the time to chat with us. I learned a ton about dropper posts and 9.8 products, and hopefully our listeners have as well. So thank you.
It's been a pleasure.
Well, you can check out some of the products we talked about here on the podcast at the 9.8 website. That's 9.8.ca. That's all we've got for this time. We'll talk to you again next time.